Welcome back to another episode of How to Become an Obstacle Buster. I'm your host, Warren Wandling, the show that's dedicated to bringing leaders and entrepreneurs strategies, tips, and resources to overcome their obstacles, to build resilience, and achieve success. If this is your first time listening or you've been part of our community for a while, thank you for tuning in today. Before I introduce you to my guest for today, I want to make sure that you're aware of our new resource to help you to be resilient. It's our private Facebook community called Leadership with Purpose. So you either can go to Facebook groups and search for Leadership with Purpose, or I'll make sure that link is in the show notes as well. In that community, I share strategies, tips, and resources so that you can step into less stress, greater profit, and experience the work you love. It's also a great place to be able to connect with other like-minded leaders and entrepreneurs. So I really look forward to seeing you in our community. Our sponsor for the show today is Audible. If you love listening to podcasts, I know you're going to love Audible like I do. It's a great way to be able to listen to books that you want to read this year. If you've not already subscribed to Audible, let me get you a free book and a free 30-day trial. In fact, the guest on my show today is the author of the book, The Respectful Leader. So you can grab his audiobook and a free 30-day trial by simply going to warrenwandling.com/audible. That's warrenwandling.com/AUDIBLE. As promised, I have a great guest with me today, Gregg Ward. Gregg Ward is a management consultant, trainer, coach, and the founder and executive director of the Center for Respectful Leadership, who is on a mission to help leaders and their organizations develop their skills around respectful leadership, emotional intelligence, and executive presence. Using the skills and techniques from his professional training in a live theater, Gregg began his career as a specialist trainer for the NYPD. Since then, he has developed and delivered thousands of keynote addresses, experiential learning programs, and executive coaching sessions for Fortune 100 and 500 organizations around the world, including ADP, Harley-Davidson, Kaiser Permanente, Kraft Foods, Siemens, the University of California, the U.S. Navy, and Warner Brothers Studios. He's here to share some of his key insights outlined in his best-selling book, The Respectful Leader. Welcome to the show, Gregg.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. As you might know, on how to become an obstacle buster, we provide different strategies, tips, and resources helping leaders and entrepreneurs to overcome their obstacles to achieve success. So really, to start that conversation today, as the executive director of the Center of Respectful Leadership, tell us about your business.
Well, we've got a unique business model. I actually started this work many, many years ago. I was a trainer for the New York City Police Department. And at that time, I fell into that work because I was working in theater and film and television in New York City. And they wanted to hire teams of actors to work with cops on how to handle what they call emotionally disturbed persons. And so I was hired to cast the actors and rehearse with them and get them ready for these interactions. And it was incredibly successful. It worked so much better than any of us thought it would. And so one way or another, that's the kind of work I've been doing for the past 25, 30 years. And so now I work with many senior executives and their leaders on helping them to transform their organizations into places where people really want to work and where customers really want to buy.
Well, that's fascinating work. And certainly it probably sounds prior to the EI or emotional intelligent work, which I know we'll probably get into later into the conversation, but it's fascinating that you were using that model to be able to train others in the in the law enforcement to be able to manage from emotional leadership level?
Well, it helped them get out of their heads and down into their hearts, to tell you the truth. We're all human beings, and when I was growing up, I didn't necessarily interact with police officers very much, but I wouldn't say I had an enormous amount of respect for them. And then when I started working with them and I saw the amount of disrespect that they had to encounter, and vice versa, how much disrespect they gave out, I realized way back then that respect is really, really important if you're going to have a really good outcome. But we also have to understand from a neuroscience point of view that respect is not a logical, thoughtful, cognitive thing. It's much more based in your reptilian, or what's known as your primitive brain, that has everything to do with emotions and reactions, the fight, flight, freeze kinds of things that come up for you when you feel under threat. And so respect is a very visceral, deep felt thing rather than this highfalutin, cognitive, thought through kind of emotion.
Yeah, excellent. I know we'll get deeper into that later, possibly into the show, but what are the greatest obstacles that your clients encounter?
Well, very often I get the call that people have fallen out with each other. They're not working well together with each other. And suddenly they are having trouble with their teams, and performance has fallen off, productivity, they're not collaborating, and they're kind of at each other's throats. And that's usually when I get the call. I wish they'd call me earlier on so that we could nip this stuff in the bud, but they usually wait until it balloons out of control, and what was a molehill becomes a big mountain. So that's that. I would say that's 2/3 to 80% of my calls are of that nature. The other is people calling me to say, hey, we see ourselves going down that road. Can you help us avoid that path?
Well, interesting. There's the 80-20 rule. Once again, it
Yes,
shows
it
up,
is.
which
So
you
true.
could train the others, the 20% to respond like the 80 instead of waiting.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, there's a rule that I call the 1/3 rule, which I still think applies to this day. The first third are people, when you go start to work with them on this interpersonal leadership skills kind of stuff, the first third really love it. They take to it, they run with it. The second third are uncomfortable with it. It's not something they've encountered before. But if I do my job well and can hold their hand through the process, they come out well on the other side. And then there's that final third who either think this is a bunch of politically correct nonsense, or they're so averse to any kind of emotional connection that it's almost impossible to help them change and move into kinds of behaviors that are more productive.
Sure, that makes sense. I like that 1/3 rule. So, what was the key strategy that contributed to you building your business?
Well, as I fell into working with the police department, I realized that my skills in live theater and acting and scripting and directing, those really were quite useful in creating experiential learning workshops on teaching leadership skills and interpersonal communication skills. And so one way or another, that's the kind of work I've been doing for the past 25, 30 years. And we're in a tiny little niche. It's actually very labor intensive, the work that I do. You've got to hire professional actors. You've got to script things out. You've got to inform them on the culture of the client that you're working with. You've got to create these scripts based on what's going on with the client. It's a really, really big, complex job to use all of those tools on a client site. So not a lot of organizations do it. And I've been in the position, I absolutely love doing it. I think it is the most powerful way to provide training and learning on interpersonal leadership skills. And so I love doing it. We're in a niche. I've been in that niche for 25 years, and we're the longest serving organization in terms of doing this work. And if I do say so myself, we have the most experience and a heck of a lot of talent and skill in doing it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Greg. Within the different clients that you've worked with, if they embrace that strategy, and the leaders embrace it within that learning curve, for them to be able to internalize what they've learned from emotional intelligence level, how quickly are they able to adapt that, comparing to use maybe more of a traditional approach?
That's a great question. It's actually really amazing. You can see people transforming. Their eyes just get really wide when they're in the middle of it. And it's a very emotional experience for them to go through our workshops. They often come out at the end of the workshop saying to me, "Oh my God, that was the most powerful and toughest workshop I've ever gone through. My whole world has been turned upside down. I now see myself and my role and the work I have to do in a completely different light." They're very appreciative. And then, if we are fortunate, they have agreed to coaching right after the workshop to go on so they can really take the skills and techniques they learned in the program and put them into practical use. So if they will agree to let me coach them after the workshop, that's when we can see a return on that investment where they're actually doing the stuff they learn, jumps up to somewhere in the realm of 75 to 95% likelihood that they're going to use the tools and techniques they learned in the class if they get coaching. If they don't, well, I'm sorry to say that it drops significantly. They enjoy the class, but then work comes flooding back in and they forget the tools and techniques they learned in the class. So the coaching is the key for retention of the skills.
Yeah, I could see why the coach would be able to internalize it, and for them to be able to continue verbalizing those new skills that they'd learned, just like in traditional models in reference to training. They have to experience it. But I love your approach, being able to experience that emotion, which a lot of leaders, at least that I've connected with, if they have those tough conversations or those environments, they tend to avoid them. Probably why 80% of the clients that contact you after it arises, because it didn't go away. So once they can connect with that emotion and knowing that there's a solution, to being able to lead with the right strategy.
Yeah, a lot of leaders are, to be honest with you, and I mean no disrespect to them, they're kind of clueless about emotional intelligence, and they just don't know, or they think, you know what, I don't have time for that warm and fuzzy stuff. Well, all the research makes it really clear that if they put the time and effort into learning about emotional intelligence and how useful it is in terms of their meeting their business goals, they would jump at the chance to practice it in a realistic kind of environment that we provide. It's just there's this kind of how shall I put it? This kind of resistance to doing anything that's considered soft skills or interpersonal skills, because you know what, I grew up and paid my dues, and I was treated like crap when I was coming up through the ranks. So everybody just has to develop a thick skin, and that's just the way it is. And it's a very self-defeating kind of attitude. So if they're coachable on emotional intelligence, then they're going to make significant strides very, very quickly.
So what advice would you give a leader about managing bad behavior, intimidation, and micromanagement?
Well, if I could boil it down, I would advise any leader who's trying to deal with bad behavior and intimidation or micromanaging, I would say nip it in the bud early. Don't let it fester. Don't let it blow up. Once you see the symptoms of that kind of behavior, then you need to strategize about how to make sure those behaviors don't continue. And that means taking a risk to go to the person who's engaging in those behaviors and very carefully providing them with some feedback in a way that they can hear it. Because a lot of people get up into a management kind of role or a leadership kind of role. They think it's their stick-to-itiveness, it's their drive that got them to where they are. And if they just keep doing that, then everything's going to fall into place. And if that means giving orders or hovering over people and micromanaging them, well, then so be it. The problem is roughly 70 to 90% of us really bristle at being micromanaged and controlled by our bosses. So once you get into that leadership role, you have to learn all sorts of new skills in order to avoid being resented by the people you lead. And so if you're a leader and you're seeing managers or other leaders in your organization start to engaging in those kind of behaviors, you got to get to them early. You got to build upon the respect that they might have for you and figure out a way to give them that feedback and give them new tools and skills so that they can go forward and you can nip that behavior in the bud before it blows out of control.
Yeah, excellent. In an article you wrote back in January of 2020, it was entitled Organizational Culture in the Age of Burnout, What Every Leader Should Know. You state, in my years spent studying the impact of respectful leadership, one important commonality holds true. Respectful boundaries and communication are the cornerstones of any organization that strives to retain top talent. What are some steps that a leader can take to build that respectful boundaries?
That is the $1,000,000 question. And the answer to it, unfortunately, really annoys a lot of leaders. You've got to start, in order to be that leader with respectful boundaries, you've got to stop being your employee's best friend. You've got to put distance between you and your employees in terms of your personal relationships. I've seen it over and over again, especially with entrepreneurs. It's all hands to the pumps. Everybody's working together. We're sleeping in the same space together. We're eating pizza together. We see each other in the worst of all situations, and we become close buddies and comrades in battle to create our organizations. And then the organization grows and you get more funding and you get all of a sudden you got product lines out there and you got levels and hierarchies, and you still want to be buddies with the people that you founded the company with. That's where it gets very, very dangerous, because what if one of them screws up and you've got to give them feedback and they're saying to you, wait a minute, we've been buddies. We built this together. I'm not interested in your feedback. And I've seen this over and over again. Leaders get too close to their people. You've got to have a respectful distance between them. And that means not socializing with them at the bar after work. That means not going on vacations together. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to get you into an enormous amount of trouble if you continue to be a buddy with your employees.
So then do you advise your clients then, is that a boundary that you've set up even before maybe it's a launch, or maybe when it's a new team and you're doing team development to set those expectations up front?
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what I do. I advise my client, if they bring me in, which I hope they would, to at the early onset of the development of their company, to set the clear swim lanes about who's going to do what and what are the cultural agreements of how we're going to operate together. You do that at the get-go, you're going to avoid a lot of misunderstandings and heartaches when you get further down the road. I can tell you a quick story. I worked for years with a former active duty officer in the Navy who's since founded his own company. And he brought me in really, really early on in the development of the company to have a heart-to-heart conversation with everybody on the development team that were creating this company. And I'll tell you, some of them people resisted this conversation. They didn't want to hear it. Oh, we're just here. We'll work together fine. Don't worry about how we get along. And he and I were united. We said, no, we're going to make this very, very clear about how we're going to work together. And it's funny, I was just talking with him on the phone the other day, and he talked about the value of doing that and how important it was to do that early on in the game, because now they're much bigger than they were, and it has really stood them in good stead since.
Yeah, that's a great story, Craig, in reference to the importance, the results. Like if you were going to begin with the end in mind, thanks to the Covey principle, that's really a great example. But I know that there are some listeners that are probably saying, well, how about those, now that we're doing everything virtually at the current time, virtual happy hours, or we're trying to do another team event, where do we draw the line of that best friend and still connecting to build a team?
Well, the behaviors that you evince when you're at those events, for example, either in person or virtual happy hour, you might offer a toast as the leader of the organization and, show everybody raise a glass and we toast our latest success. And then you say, folks, this has been terrific. You'll have to excuse me. I've got a lot that I've got to attend to. Have fun, but please don't drink and drive your laptop. And then sign off. Essentially, you can be with them for a moment in a very professional capacity, and then move away and move out of that situation. It's the same when you're in person with them. If you're going to have a lot of organizations, every year I issue a little newsletter about the holiday party. And the risks you run at the holiday party, for example, people drinking too much, you definitely drinking too much can be a big problem. Or if you say or do anything that might be considered disrespectful in any way, shape, or form, that is going to come back and bite you in the backside. So unfortunately, you have to be really on your best behavior in any kind of social gathering with your team. It's just the best way to ensure that the relationship stays professional. And I can't urge that more, especially in this day when we're all kind of on edge. People are misbehaving. People are saying things, especially online, that probably they're going to regret if they said them in person. And we as leaders have to lead the way with respect, because if we don't, people will pick up on it. They'll say, oh, well, if he's doing it, then I can do it too. And pretty soon you've got a free-for-all and chaos on your hands, and you're running into HR's office going, help, help, help. And the HR folks are going, why didn't you tell me about this a long time before?
Yeah, thank you for the clarity on that. I'm really curious, what is the neuroscience of respect?
Well, it is a bit complicated, but the best way I can describe it is for you to imagine yourself in a situation whereby you're working for somebody who constantly interrupts you during meetings, during brainstorming sessions. Every time you say something, it's either contradicted or you get interrupted. Now, the first couple of times you might chalk it up to, oh, well, they're just trying to move the action forward. I get it. But if it keeps happening and you're noticing that other people are not being interrupted the way you are by your boss, there's a part of you that's going to feel offended. And it's going to be very much in your gut. You're going to have this feeling like, what the heck, what's happening? Why is this happening? And you're going to go into what's called fight, flight, or freeze mode. Now, once your brain detects a threat, the amygdala, which is, for lack of a better phrase, is the drugstore of the brain. It gives permission for the brain to release various hormones. So if you feel under threat, your boss continues to interrupt you, your brain is going to release three very powerful hormones. One is adrenaline, which we all know about. The second is cortisol, also known as the stress hormone. And the third is, it's really hard to pronounce. So, but the point of this is, if you're filled up with hormones, if you've ever felt the rush of anger and emotion through your body because you felt under threat, there's not a lot of thinking going on. Your neocortex, where all the higher level math and music and writing, all that occurs in the neocortex. Your neocortex is not engaged. You're purely filled with emotions. So here you are sitting in this meeting, you're pissed off at your boss for constantly interrupting you. Now is not the time to take your boss on about this. You've got to simmer down. You've got to calm down. You've got to focus on what's important, and so on and so forth. So the bottom line is this: the neuroscience of respect is this. Respect is not a cognitive, thoughtful process. It comes from a much more deep-seated, primitive part of your brain. And there's an old saying, when people feel respected, it's kind of like air. When there's plenty of it, nobody even thinks about it. But when it's lacking, or there's disrespect or a lack of air, then it's all everybody can think about. So at the end of the day, be aware that respect is very much deep in your gut, and it's an emotional thing that lives within you. I've met people who can think back to 25 or 30 years ago when they were disrespected by a boss, and they could tell me, like, in the moment, here's what I was doing, here's what happened, and here's how I felt from 25 years before. That's how powerful respect and disrespect is.
Yeah, that is really powerful illustration. I think that's probably why your clients, it's so important, the work that you're doing, because that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, to be able to manage that process when it does occur, how to be able to react to it.
Absolutely. And when even 5 years ago, when I started talking about emotional intelligence, and we know Daniel Goleman, has been talking about it for years.
Right.
I always got the eye roll, like, oh, really? Oh, come on. That's just, who needs that stuff? And what we've now discovered is that EI is extraordinarily important, and respect and respectful leadership are absolutely hand in glove with emotional intelligence. And so people are starting to get it now, and it heartens me. I would say there's still plenty of people who don't get it or don't value it whatsoever, but I think we're turning the tide on that a little bit.
Yeah, which is great news for just leadership in general, and the workforce, and in level of engagement.
Yeah, people are kind of fed up with being bullied at work. It doesn't work. It may have been something that you experienced when you were coming up through the ranks, but it absolutely doesn't work. It reduces morale significantly. There are all sorts of data that show that people disengage more when they're bullied or micromanaged or treated poorly, disrespectfully. They spend a lot of time ruminating on what happened and less time at work. They'll go out of their way to avoid the person who disrespected them. There's a whole bunch of data out there that make it really clear that valuing emotional intelligence, valuing respectful leadership is actually really, really good for business.
Right. And very good. And I appreciate you championing that message as well. I think success leaves clues. And one of those clues are the books that leaders read. So what are some books that have influenced you in your business?
One of the first books that influenced me was Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a business fable, basically set in a fictional corporation where a new CEO is taken over, and all of the classic dysfunctions amongst her leadership team come bubbling to the surface over the course of an offsite meeting. And so that was one of them. It actually, if I may, led me to eventually write my book, The Respectful Leadership, which came out in 26. The Respectful Leader, that came out from John Wiley in 2016. It too is a business fable, like the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I wanted to write a book about my experiences with all my different clients over the years that was very, very realistic. And I've been really fortunate. People have really taken to it. It's an easy read. People say, yes, I see these behaviors. So I learned that a business fable, a story, is a very powerful way to help people understand how valuable emotional intelligence and respect is. Another one is Getting to Yes. I don't know if you remember Getting to Yes?
Oh, yeah, that's
Getting
an
to
excellent
Yes.
book. Yeah,
It's a
excellent
great
book.
book. It's a short. It's a primer on how to negotiate, and it came out long before emotional intelligence was even talked about. But essentially it's arguing for emotional intelligence during business negotiations, and it's really, really useful.
Yeah, those are both great books.
Thank you.
Yeah, so within your background, looking forward, to the end of this year and beyond. So what does the future hold for you? Are you developing any special projects?
We really are. And, any organization that hasn't realized how much they need to pivot as a result of COVID-19 is destined, in my opinion, to struggle or fail. And so we've had to pivot too. I'll be honest, all of my work for the past 25 years has been in person. How do you teach leadership skills and interpersonal communication skills when not being in person with people? And so that's what I've been doing. My keynotes are always in person, my workshops, my seminars, everything's done in person. Well, when this hit, I realized that I was about to lose all of my business if I didn't pivot. And so I brought together a really amazing group. And I must say, they're all millennials who they totally get it about distance learning, online learning, blended learning. And they are creating a suite of programs based on all the work we've been doing the past 3 decades into an online learning experience, which is, as a baby boomer, this thing is blowing my mind. The tools they are bringing to bear, the things that they're creating that I had no idea could be done. Now, is it as good as in person? No, it's not. I do not believe you will ever be able to match the in-person experience, especially using live actors that we do in our programs. But it's pretty damn close, and it's really, really effective. And we are about to launch them in September of 2020. We are launching a suite of programs, and that is our big push for the next 2 years, is to build these programs off. We've already got a lot of organizations really interested in them. So it's really exciting for me. As much as I love flying somewhere and doing this work, it's kind of nice sitting at home and leading people through the program using my laptop.
Right. There's definitely some benefits if they're within that in the virtual model, and you're connecting with the millennials and other generations they're the emerging leaders. And so to be able to connect with how they communicate in some of the online systems that's a great way to be able to pivot.
I'm really excited about it. And to be honest with you, I resisted it because I just had this tunnel vision of thinking nobody can do it better than I can do it the way I do it. And that's just not true. And I learned a very humbling experience. I've got to pivot. I got to figure out what works now. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, excellent. So if our listeners wanted to connect with you, what's the best way for them to be able to reach out?
Your listeners should visit our website, respectfulleadership.org, which is the Center for Respectful Leadership. And there's always all sorts of ways to connect through our website. Again, that's respectfulleadership.org.
And can they also find your book at that same website?
Yeah, they can find it there, or they can just go on Amazon and search for The Respectful Leader. And it's also out as an audio book, and you can download it as a Kindle. It comes in all sorts of ways on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. Any online seller you can purchase the book.
Well, excellent. I'll make sure both of those links are in the show notes.
Thank you.
Well, Gregg, I appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your strategies and tips and resources, helping our listeners to break through those obstacles to achieve success.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure being on.
Well, this is your host, Warren Wandling, saying next time, be resilient,